you have to be selfish if you're a person that's rich, that's making money, and you don't want to pay your fair share of taxes. Well, when you think about the billionaires in the city of New York, they make up about 48% in terms of the amount of taxes that they dole out compared to the average American, compared to the rest of New Yorkers. And if you're talking about raising their taxes while doing these other things, you're making New York unattractive, not just for residents, but for businesses.
Stephen A. Smith just went scorched earth on Zoran Mamdani and the Democratic leadership backing him, delivering a blistering, no-filter takedown that landed hard and left bruises. His comments weren't subtle, they weren't polite, and they weren't meant to be. This was the kind of critique that forces people to stop scrolling and actually listen.
85% of the population lives there. That's where I live. That's why I'm on POTUS. That's where we live. We ain't veering one way or the other to the extreme because we understand, it is about affordability, but it's also about the economy. It's also about safety in the streets. And when you're talking about the combination of a free bus rides or free grocery stores, and oh, by the way, less police, or at least not more police officers, and not prioritizing law enforcement in the streets of a city, of a state, of the United States of America, you got a problem.
The outspoken sports media heavyweight didn't pull a single punch, ripping straight into what he sees as the DNC's deeply flawed strategy to claw back power from Donald Trump and the Republican machine. His breakdown was sharp, intense, and unapologetically blunt. So hit that subscribe button now, because once this starts, there's no easing into it.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me be very, very clear. If the Democratic Party becomes the likes of Zoran Mamdani, who, by the way, I like, I'm not trying to throw any shade on him or anything like that, but if the Democratic Party becomes him, you have no chance. You have no chance on a national basis in terms of the presidency. In Senate, seats in the House, you have no chance. You have no chance. I want to be very, very clear about that. You might have a Democratic socialist sprinkled here and there, but that ain't what America is. America's about capitalism. America's about dollars and cents. America's about an economy, a flourishing economy. Okay? And you know what it's not about? Free stuff.
From the very first moments, Stephen A. went straight for the jugular, blasting Democratic power brokers for propping up Mamdani as their newest political golden child. Since winning the New York mayoral race, Mamdani has been everywhere, dominating headlines, cable panels, and political chatter nonstop. To Stephen A., that kind of exposure doesn't happen by accident. It looks like a carefully choreographed rollout for a future 2028 presidential push. But Smith warns that this playbook is headed for disaster. In his view, Democrats are once again misreading the American voter. While progressive insiders cheer sweeping promises and expanded government, everyday voters hear higher taxes, weaker accountability, and creeping socialism. Stephen A. insists voters aren't asking for freebies. They want stability, opportunity, and leadership grounded in reality. Elevating Mamdani nationally, he argues, could become the DNC's next massive self-inflicted wound.
I like Mamdani. I'm looking forward to interviewing him. He's promised to be on this show. But I'm very, very concerned about some of the things that he said. I'm very concerned about what he once said about defunding the police. I'm calling 911. I'm being real with you. I'm calling 911. That's what I'm doing. I don't want to see less police officers. I want to see more police officers. I heard him talk about mental health experts in the subway system. I don't care about that. I want cops in the subways in New York City, where I was born and raised. Born in the Bronx, raised in Queens. That's what I want. I want to hear about no damn mental health experts in subways. Nah, I'm not trying to hear that.
Stephen A. Smith then explains exactly why he believes Mamdani would implode on a national stage, and he doesn't sugarcoat a thing. His central criticism targets Mamdani's support for defunding the police, which Smith calls pure electoral poison in a presidential race. He highlights Mamdani's proposal to replace police officers in New York subways with mental health workers. On paper, it sounds compassionate. In reality, Stephen A. says it's dangerously disconnected from how public safety actually works. Subways are volatile environments where quick enforcement matters. Removing officers, he argues, invites chaos and leaves commuters exposed. Smith stresses that public safety is a hard red line for American voters. When crime hits close to home, ideology fades fast. Policies that weaken policing don't signal empathy, he says, they signal disorder. And that's a gamble no serious presidential contender survives.
2% tax on the rich. Okay, fine. 11.5% capital gains tax. On its face, okay, fine. Free buses, free grocery stores in each borough? Really? Really think that's gonna work? Ladies and gentlemen, we're at a crossroads in this nation, and there's no way. And the level of vitriol that you see amongst the American citizen is because, God forbid, that you have a difference of opinion. It's not enough to agree. You know, people have to be disagreeable.
Stephen then turns his fire toward Mamdani's economic agenda, zeroing in on his plan to aggressively tax the wealthy. The proposal has already triggered predictable backlash, with businesses and high earners preparing exits to lower tax states. To Smith, that isn't fairness, it's self-sabotage. Gut the tax base and you weaken the city you claim to protect. He also unloads on Mamdani's promise of government-run free grocery stores across the boroughs. Marketed as compassion, Stephen calls it financially reckless and historically naive. Subsidized markets, he argues, distort competition, chase away private investment, and foster dependence rather than opportunity. Instead of moving New York forward, these policies risk dragging it backward, prioritizing feel-good symbolism over real economic outcomes that collapse once theory meets reality.
And if you're talking about raising their taxes while doing these other things, you're making New York unattractive, not just for residents, but for businesses. And if you make it unattractive for businesses and you compromise the ability to be the capitalists that these people are, then they take their businesses elsewhere. So the money that they paid on their homes or in rent, they move out of the city or the state. Businesses follow. And ultimately the tax burden falls on to New Yorkers out there.
Already, countless New Yorkers are leaving for one simple reason. They want to keep what they earn. As taxes rise, affluent residents and major employers are relocating to friendlier states, taking jobs, capital, and revenue with them. The burden doesn't disappear, it shifts onto the middle and working class who can't just pack up and leave. Critics warn that instead of stabilizing the city, Mamdani's agenda is accelerating decline. Money flows out, services erode, neighborhoods hollow out, and economic momentum slows to a crawl. What remains is a shrinking population paying more for less. Stephen says this is how great cities decay, not overnight but gradually. A slow bleed driven by unchecked taxation and ideological experimentation. Alive in name only.
Which means that rent freezes, which is also something that Mandani pushed. Is that really going to be plausible? Are you really going to be able to freeze rent? Or are you going to end up hiking it because you don't have enough people here to pay it? Tax revenue, where you getting that from? See, these are all the kind of things that we have to connect the dots and ask ourselves, 1 + 1, does it equal 2? Is it really plausible that these things are going to happen? According to Mayor Hochul, 90% of the stuff Mamdani said he can't do on his own. He got to come through her in the state legislature in order to get it done. Is he going to be able to do that? What level of support is he going to have outside of young whippersnappers out there who love him and are so in love with his personality and everything else that they didn't really dot the I's and cross the T's and look at actual policies and the kind of effect that's going to have on New Yorkers? That's what I'm worried about. I hope I'm wrong.
This is where Stephen drops a crucial point most people overlook. For Mamdani's sweeping agenda to become reality, it has to pass Governor Kathy Hochul. Without her approval, his big promises stall before leaving the runway. And that traps Mamdani politically. If Hochul blocks or waters down his plans, he risks looking like another politician who campaigned loudly and delivered nothing. But if those proposals advance, Stephen warns the fallout could be worse. Rolling out radical policies could shock New York's economy, public safety systems, and tax structure almost overnight. Either path leads to damage, political or practical. In Smith's view, Mamdani is boxed in with no clean exit, and his momentum may already be slipping.
I'm looking forward to sitting down and interviewing with her. I just want to know where the money coming from. See, I count, okay? I count. And I can't tell you how many young teenagers, it could be daughters, it could be nieces and nephews, it could be friends and family members or relatives of folks along that age gap. and you're asking the same question. And you know what you come up with? The people who love Mamdani the most are not people who pay bills every day. I'm not saying that applies to everybody. I'm not applying that. But they certainly not people that pay bills every day all the time. You don't see business owners clamoring to support them. I'm just saying these things are important to bring up because there's going to be a divide that takes place. Remember, Mamdani's ascension and his win in the mayoral election in New York last night is entirely different.
Stephen A. doesn't mince words as he issues a stark warning. If Democrats elevate Mamdani to the national stage, the party risks splitting straight down the middle. On one side are business owners, entrepreneurs, and professionals who see his anti-capitalist messaging as a direct threat to investment and stability. To them, Mamdani signals higher taxes, heavier regulation, and hostility toward private enterprise. On the other side are voters drawn to sweeping government guarantees and promised benefits, often without fully grasping who pays for them. Stephen A. argues this divide wouldn't stay theoretical. It would become economic and cultural. Rather than unifying the country, a Mamdani candidacy could deepen resentment between wealth creators and redistribution advocates, fracturing the party from within.
But the reason I bring that up is because their campaign was a bit different than Zoran Mamdani. They were talking about affordability issues just like he was. But they were also a bit more pragmatic in their thinking. They weren't talking about free grocery stores and free bus rides. They weren't talking about those things. They were talking about centrist kind of policies that would ingratiate themselves with the vast majority of American citizens in their respective states. Because guess what? They recognize that's where the meat of the electorate live.
Stephen A. then draws a sharp contrast between Abigail Spanberger's approach and Mamdani's vision, highlighting how far apart they truly are. Both acknowledge the same reality. Affordability is crushing families. Rents are rising, groceries cost more, and daily life is harder. But that's where the similarity ends. Spanberger focuses on lowering taxes, cutting red tape, and reducing bureaucracy so builders can increase housing supply and ease prices. It's a market-based strategy aimed at fixing the system. Mamdani, by contrast, embraces ideological experimentation. Instead of reforming capitalism, he seeks to replace it with centralized control, government programs, and aggressive taxation. Stephen A. argues that while Spanberger aims to make markets work better, Mamdani risks tearing them apart entirely.
And when you're talking about the combination of a free bus rides or free grocery stores, and oh, by the way, less police, or at least not more police officers, and not prioritizing law enforcement in the streets of a city, of a state, of the United States of America, you got a problem. You got a problem. And so now we got to sit up here and we got to ask ourselves, where are we going from here? Where you going to find yourself? What you going to do? Because we got a shutdown going on.
Stephen A. then delivers a blunt warning to Mamdani, pointing to what he says doomed Kamala Harris, pandering to the political fringes. Elections aren't won on Twitter or activist stages, he says. They're won in the middle. Most Americans care about bills, safety, and stability. Smith argues Donald Trump understood this, shaping his message around economic concerns, border security, and cost of living. That broad appeal, he says, is why Trump dominated at the polls. If Mamdani continues crafting policies for ideological extremes instead of real-world voters, Stephen A. warns his national ambitions are finished. Without moderates, swing voters, and working families, the path to the White House doesn't exist.
How long you think that's gonna last before disorder reigns? You can't do this to American people. You can't do it. Now I know that we've seen politicians say all of these things and address some of these things, but I ain't satisfied the fervor with which it's been addressed because the shutdown is still going on. And needless to say, the president chimed in because a lot of people chimed in.
In the end, Stephen A. Smith delivers a brutal reality check for Mamdani, leaving little room for optimism. From radical policy proposals to steep taxes, weakened policing, and expansive free service promises, Mamdani risks alienating both the wealthy who fund the city and the middle class who sustain it. Smith warns these unchecked policies are driving people out of New York, hollowing it out economically and socially. On the national stage, the obstacles only grow higher. Mamdani must win over Hochul, appeal to middle America, and avoid the trap of ideological pandering. Unlike pragmatic figures such as Abigail Spanberger or even Donald Trump, Mamdani's ideology-first approach could fracture the party and isolate voters. Stephen A's verdict is unforgiving. Without a major course correction, Mamdani's climb looks increasingly unstable. That wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it, hit like and subscribe for more sharp, unfiltered takes.